Argonne National Laboratory. My name is Justin Bro with Argonne's Communications and Public Affairs Department. We have a fascinating discussion for you today, and we're going to be talking about the future of nuclear energy and its role in a clean energy economy. Now, joining us will be Dr. Catherine Huff, who is currently acting secretary for the Department of Energy's Department of Nuclear Energy. I might have to correct that in a little bit. But also we're going to be joined by Argonne's Andrew Bashirs, who's a nuclear chemist. Now, before we jump into our conversation, many of you may know that this year, actually on July 1st, sparks the 75-year anniversary of Argonne National Laboratory. To take you back a little bit insofar as history, 75 years ago, Enrico Fermi and a group of ragtag scientists got together and created the first sustained nuclear reaction, and we can see the benefits of that work to this day insofar as providing clean energy for millions of people throughout the world for businesses and homes. So if we take it back to where present day, today we're going to be speaking about the future of nuclear energy 75 years after that first chain reaction. So without further ado, let's see if Dr. Catherine Huff is ready to join us, and we'll see to get this party started, and she is. This is going to be great. Good morning, good morning. Good morning, good morning.
Hello, can you see me?
I can you see me?
Great, I certainly can. It's nice to see you.
Nice to see you as well. How are you doing today?
I am very well.
Excellent. Okay. Well, I know you are a very busy person. Because I was just reading through your bio, and you're acting assistant secretary, you're principal deputy assistant secretary for the Office of Nuclear Energy. I think I flubbed that a little bit earlier, so I just want to correct that. You hail from UIUC. For those who don't know, the acronym is University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and you oversee activities for the Office of Nuclear Energy that include nuclear facility operations, science and technology innovation, and international nuclear energy policy. So my first question is, since you have all this time on your hands, what do you do? No, I'm sorry, that's just a joke. I have bad jokes. You might even watch these things know I have full but let's jump into it. So you are Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Nuclear Energy Office of Nuclear Energy within the Department of Energy. What made you want to become a scientist, and what was the STEM path that led you to your current position?
Oh, well, you know, I was born into it. My parents are both mechanical engineers, and so my upbringing was really centered around books and tinkering and exploration of machines and ideas, much more than, you know, a lot of other families. You know, we weren't focused on sports or religion. It was all about, you know, books and thinking and exploration and tinkering. And you know, that led me to be a really curious person just in general. I was curious about how our energy system works. I was lucky. I grew up in a very rural place, which enabled me the freedom to tinker and to explore, but it did mean that I ran out of math to take in my very rural high school in Belleville, Texas. So I was lucky to join the Texas Academy of Mathematics and Science, which is a public magnet school in Texas, where you go for 2 years instead of junior and senior year of high school. You go to the University of North Texas and take their math and science curriculum. And that set me up to get into the University of Chicago, where I majored in physics. And of course, at that point, I was really excited about nuclear energy already. The University of Chicago, as you've just mentioned, has this great history in nuclear fission and the nuclear fission chain reaction. And I was able to, you know, feel that history throughout my undergrad. And then I joined, you know, physics was really great. I did a lot of great research in physics, had a great time. But it seemed like the best way to make an impact on the world would be through nuclear energy. And so I had a great class on big problems at the University of Chicago, and it taught me that nuclear energy could really be the key to carbon-free energy in this world that's climate constrained. And so I went to graduate school at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I got my PhD in nuclear energy, did a postdoc at Berkeley, and spent 5 years as a faculty member. A few months ago, I got a call saying I could potentially serve the US government in our fight towards a solution to climate change. And so here I am.
That's an amazing story. Thank you for sharing. Now, as I was reading through your bio, I noticed that something was missing, and the fact that you are a voracious reader now. So when we had our pre-interview, you mentioned how much you read. So I, as an avid reader myself, I'm curious what types of books you read and how do these support your opinion about nuclear energy?
I read lots of science fiction and lots of historical nonfiction about physics and nuclear energy. Some of my favorite books are like Atomic Accidents and The Making of the Atomic Bomb and Girls of the Atomic City. There's some really great books out there about the history of nuclear energy, but I also really love science fiction. You know, most recently, I think my favorite sci-fi books have been the Imperial Ratch series, which is about a fleet of sentient spaceships. Yeah.
Well, because we need those. Absolutely.
And these kind of books, you know, they give you all kinds of context. The history in particular about nuclear energy gives us a lot of lessons about what's been done in the past that was successful, what was learned and how it was learned, what kinds of lessons we might not want to repeat in the future. You know, I especially love reading about atomic accidents and atomic mistakes because, you know, if you don't know the history, of course, you're doomed to repeat it. And I think we shouldn't repeat some of the things that we've done in the past.
Absolutely. 100% agree. I'm sure everybody watching agrees too. One of your roles is to oversee science and technology for the Office of Nuclear Energy. What does innovation mean in terms of the scientific community, but also what does innovation mean in terms of public benefit?
Such a great question. You know, in the scientific community, of course, we think of innovation as being the birth of new ideas, but it also extends towards the ushering of those ideas into fruition, into maturity, technological maturity, commercial maturity. Innovation is all of those things, the full path between a crazy idea through the tinkering into the maturity and into potentially the commercial marketplace. Of course, when we think of brand new crazy ideas, I often think of universities and faculty members and students thinking up wild things. And then the national laboratories are the right place for those ideas to mature once they've been down selected into the ones that are likely to function and work and benefit humanity. And then the national laboratories can hand those off to companies here in the United States. And I think that that's the right path for innovation. Now, in terms of public benefit, all of that benefits the public. You know, the work that we do in universities and in the context of innovation and research and development really benefits the training and workforce system, where we create new thinkers through the process of the apprenticeship system of graduate school and undergraduate research. And all of that work benefits the public by creating new brilliant minds, new thinkers and doers. And then eventually, once those ideas are commercialized through the national labs and companies, they benefit the public by producing energy with cleaner air and ensuring a sustainable future.
And some of those people might become science fiction writers that can inspire the next generation of STEM professionals as well. I myself am very much Star Trek, and so I'll just leave it there. So your undergrad is from the University of Chicago, as you mentioned earlier, and your graduate degree is from the University of Wisconsin. Strong Midwestern ties there. Help us understand the difference between work done at the university, and you touched on this a little bit in your last response, but work done at the university and work done at a national lab in terms of the scale that we're able to achieve.
Yes. Oh, this is such a perfect question because, you know, at a university, there's a little bit of latitude for high-risk ideas. That's why we get tenure, you know. It's not just because university faculty are prima donnas. We get tenure so that we have the freedom to explore ideas that are uncool or hard to fund or politically untenable. And so universities are a great sandbox for those unusual ideas, ideas that may not have immediate clear promise, high-risk experiments, high-reward activities. Things like mRNA research came out of university systems, and here we are now, like, living that benefit. Now, the national laboratories have the infrastructure and the skilled labor to do really intensive, careful, higher technology readiness activities. They can perfect ideas and bring them to fruition. They have the infrastructure and facilities to do bigger scale experiments, more sort of robust and certifiable experiments that meet the kinds of standards that you might see in regulatory environments like nuclear. And so the national laboratories really take those ideas that maybe are born on a university campus with the wacky ideas of faculty and students, and filter those up. And the infrastructure at National Labs really makes it a place for serious experiments on like lower risk activities that are still extremely high reward. And so it really tries to match those like demonstrated proof of concept ideas and bring them to a proof of capability.
I think that's so amazing. Like just at Argonne, not to mention the other 16 national labs, we have what's called the Advanced Photon Source, big X-ray machine. We can do really big science, but it's incredibly expensive, right? So university budgets and even industry won't necessarily have the budget to do this type of building for this type of infrastructure. Same thing, like just a little plug. We have the Aurora supercomputer coming online next year. Exascale, very fast computer, but again, not an investment that maybe universities or private industry would make at this point in time. And you've been talking about the national lab system and a lot of perfect things about it. But what role does the national lab system play in terms of the development of technologies and working with partners to deploy particularly nuclear technologies?
Yeah, that final step in the technology readiness innovation pipeline is a really complicated and interesting one with such history. Our national lab system, having been born out of that Manhattan Project, is now a big and broad system of myriad different national laboratories. Some are Office of Science, some are DoD, some are DOE, NE. We have this breadth of infrastructure that's capable of bringing those ideas into a commercializable technology readiness. Some technologies are too risky for companies to attempt on their own, or they're too capitally intensive to do the kinds of experiments that would support regulatory needs. Or, in the context of nuclear, of course, they're regulated already just as technologies, and so it can be very hard to set up and get a license to do the experiments that you need to commercialize your technology. But the national laboratories have that setup and that infrastructure. Some of the great examples of this include real sort of technology innovations through the advanced reactor system. Many of the advanced reactors, of course, in our broader understanding of Gen 4 reactors and next generation reactors were drawn up on paper at Argonne, built out at Idaho, and commercialized in the commercial space. And we're really looking now at a next generation of all of that with the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program, through which we're supporting a bunch of advanced reactor designs from the Department of Energy that originated, conceptually in the national laboratories and the universities, and through collaboration with the national laboratories, companies are bringing those reactors to fruition. It takes a lot of engagement from DOE, NE, engagement with NRC, and support from the national laboratories and the Office of Nuclear Energy. Without those partners, it's really impossible for those nuclear innovations to be brought to fruition just because of the nature of the technology. There are a lot of restrictions with what's possible, in a garage.
Right, well, probably rightly so. There are no so many restrictions. What do you spend most of your time thinking about?
Oh, leading this office has been really interesting, but I've been able to crystallize some of my thoughts into three major priorities. First and foremost, if we intend to transition to a carbon-free future, we must keep the existing nuclear reactors online. So that's a key priority. The second is, of course, we must deploy these advanced reactors so that the next generation of nuclear scientists can deploy a next generation of reactors and see a next generation of carbon-free technology. But I think most importantly, most recently, I'm really excited about pursuing and restarting a consent-based siting process for spent nuclear fuel interim storage. That consent-based process was recommended by the Blue Ribbon Commission on America's Nuclear Future in the Obama era, but it got rolling and some progress was made. But a few years ago, of course, it was stopped. And we're really excited to be in a position now in this administration to restart that consent-based siting process, which will seek community with some enthusiastic consent around potentially siting an interim storage facility where the existing spent nuclear fuel on existing nuclear reactor facility locations can be taken title of by the Department of Energy, which of course, in 1998, DOE was responsible to begin taking title of the spent nuclear fuel in this country. And it's been a very long time since then, and we still have not done so. And it's definitely DOE's responsibility to take on that task, take title of that fuel, and put it in an interim storage facility while we determine a final location for that spent fuel. And the only way to do that in an energy just and environmentally just way is through a consent-based siting process, like the one that we've seen in Finland, for example, where they just broke ground on their geologic repository last month. So we're very hopeful about the prospect of a consent-based siting process restarting, and it's something I'm thinking about most days.
That keeps you up at night. So I just want to like unpack consent-based, because that, like when you first mentioned that, I was like, oh, what does that mean? But it's not just taking the spent nuclear fuel and put them in the community, right? What are the other benefits that come along with this agreement?
That's right. So, consent-based siting really has to explore the kinds of incentive systems that a community might need to agree to volunteer to be the community that takes on the responsibility of our nation's spent nuclear fuel. That would include, ideally, a great number of jobs just inherent to that facility itself, potentially tax incentives for the region, infrastructure incentives for the region, and lots of other federal benefits that come with a federal facility in your community. Now, of course, there are burdens. It is a spent fuel burden. And so the appropriate return on the investment of that community needs to be negotiated with that community. And we need to understand what can bring that community to not just a yes, but an enthusiastic yes about such an interim storage facility.
That's perfect. Thank you. I have other questions for you, but why don't I just bring Andrew in? So I'm going to bring Andrew Bashirs, who was a nuclear chemist at Argonne National Laboratory, to join us at this moment, and he's on. And I'm going to bring you on both right now to have a couple of questions, and we'll give him a couple of seconds. That's perfect. There we go. Say, Andrew, are you here?
Yeah, can you two hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can. Good morning. Thanks for joining us. So we're gonna get into your bio a little bit later, Andrew, but I have a question for both of you, and I'm going to ask the Acting Assistant Secretary if she'd start off. But some weeks ago, we were able to speak with Deputy Director Shalonda Baker on the topic of energy justice. How can we think of energy justice in terms of the development and deployment of nuclear energy?
Oh man, and isn't Shalonda Baker just amazing? We're extremely lucky in the administration to have people like her working at the forefront of this. Energy justice and environmental justice in the context of deployment need to think about procedural justice. How are disadvantaged or underrepresented communities included in the process for decision making around siting or development of a technology, as well as the kinds of justice that reflect historical injustices and potentially through reparations and other kinds of activities. One can take a community that has been harmed in the past and make sure that they're benefited in the future. And while there's a lot of struggles with identifying the equities and the inequities here, the Department of Energy, for example, has right now, over a dozen working groups on energy justice. We're interested in the EJ40. 40% of our dollars need to be going to communities that are in this position where they've maybe been harmed by energy systems in the past. And all those working groups have lots of different pieces, EJ40 related things, equity related identity issues, siting issues, development issues. And there are just so many that I couldn't possibly list them here, but I'll say that the Department of Energy is looking very broadly at all of them at this time. And I think you're going to see them in the processes and procedures, as well as the public engagements that the Department of Energy is going to be starting up in the near term. And hopefully you're already seeing some of it.
That's excellent. Thank you for that, Andrew.
Yeah, so I think, and especially as we look at how the nuclear community has really embraced the larger community that was around them and nationwide, we see that oftentimes we've been looking at things like equity, diversity, inclusion as an opportunity. And I think that's been kind of a backwards way of looking at it. We need to look at this not as an opportunity, but as a duty. So much of what we do needs to focus on those who are affected, and everybody in our community is affected by options of power. How do they receive electricity? How do they receive medicine? How do they receive, not just their necessities, but also their desires to better themselves and better those around them. And I think that that's something that we need to do as a part of the nuclear community, is to take on that duty and to make sure that equity is at the forefront of our mind while we're going on and we're teaching and we're engaging and going back to the consent citing. We need to understand, that this isn't a zero-sum game. This needs to be something that we all can benefit from.
That's excellent. Thank you for that. For my next question for both of you, and as a communicator, this is very close to my heart, but I'd like for you to share a few words on the importance of this communication between the nuclear industry and the public. Andrew, let's start with you.
Yeah, actually, this is something that I care very much about. I go to K through 12 and even universities and give talks about what I do and what Argonne does quite a bit. And I want to actually kind of give a little story about this, and especially going back and thinking about energy justice. And I use public transportation quite a bit, and especially getting to and from the lab. And I remember one day I'm reading a paper by a researcher named Michael Afridikin, who does a lot of uranium activation, and we can start to get into that in a little bit. But for anybody who's just like looking at it, it probably looks like a jumble of letters and lines, and it's really hard and complicated to really wrap your mind around if this is the first time that you're looking at it. And one day in particular, I'm reading this paper and I hear this sigh from over my shoulder, and I turn and I look, and it's this little girl, and she's peeking over the seat behind us, and she's looking at the paper. And rather than just smiling and going about my day, I decided to engage her. And so I asked her, this probably looks really complicated, or you probably don't quite, but is there anything on here that you understand? And sure enough, she pointed at CO2 and said, oh, that's carbon dioxide. I learned about that in school. And I said, that's great, because that gave us a foundation to talk about something. And so I told her about the paper and why something that people consider harmful, such as uranium, which it's not, but a lot of people, especially in the community, do still think that, and we need to confront that as a part of our duty in communicating with the public. And so I had this really, really nice talk with her about, getting rid of carbon dioxide by using uranium or technetium or all these different types of metals to do catalytic conversion, and told her, this is how it works, and at a very high level. And it was great, because at the very end of it, like, I'm not sure how much I was able to get to her, but her dad actually looked me in the eyes and said, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to her. And, that really does reinforce the fact that, we've been looking at this as an opportunity, but it's a duty. It's a duty for us to communicate with the public. And so much so also with furthering this idea of energy justice. So that's really what I've taken away from, needing to communicate with the public.
That's excellent. And I think the next thing you're going to say is that young girl grew up to be Greta Thunberg.
It kind of, I wish I knew, a little more of her story. It's been a couple of years now, and I think, especially looking at the challenges that she's probably going to face, and hearing more stories from my female colleagues about how the system has really treated them, and has really shown this disparagement in diversity and inclusion and equity that I'm hoping that my interaction has provided some good, but I just hope that the community can be there. The rest of this community can be there for her to help her understand like where her desires and dreams might be and stuff.
I'm sure they will. Thank you for that. That was amazing. How about you, Katie?
That is just a beautiful story. I loved it. And I think, it really touches on something kind of specific, which is there is historically this information deficit model of communicating with the public, where there's this assumption that it's merely the things that people don't understand that create public skepticism and hostility to science. But, you know, in reality, sort of what Andrew's touched on is that if you meet people where they are, you understand what they do know, what they understand, what they want to know, and where their questions are before, for example, launching into what your concept map of the whole thing is, then, you know, you get a lot further in terms of real engagement and communications, you know, and it's also important to think of it not as just one way, not just as questions they have for you, but rather things that you can learn from physicians. You know, I think Andrew's touched on this in a number of places here in his conversation, ways in which, you know, engaging with young people or women who are his colleagues, he's learned a lot about their experience, and this has helped with engagement. And I think that's exactly where nuclear needs to be heading. And I think we do come from this place where there still are a lot of folks who really genuinely believe that it is primarily an information deficit issue. And I think really there's a lot more to it than that. There's a lot of institutional engagements that cause people to distrust nuclear. There are a lot of people who handle engagements differently than perhaps they could. And I think the more we learn about the people who have questions and the people who have concerns and listen to their concerns and ask them questions, the less of that information deficit model, which is considered harmful, we will be incorporating into our communications. And I think a lot of the young folks on this Instagram Live probably know that for sure. So there's no question here that you guys are definitely on board. So I'm hopeful.
Yeah, and I love both of your responses. I absolutely love it. And you're preaching to the choir here, you know, so to speak, because having worked in social media so long, you realize how at this point, communications just can't be a one-lane road, right? I mean, you have to be able to engage and interact with people, but also learn in that process, right? Like if we're talking about Andrew, the jumping off point was the CO2. Now, just like you said, we can build a conversation. We have something to talk about. I can learn from you and from where you are, and you can learn from me from where I'm at. Maybe not all the other stuff, but you have a place to start with. But I don't want to take too much of your time. But I do want to say thank you to Dr. Catherine Huff. She's going to be leaving us now. She is Acting Assistant Secretary and Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Office of Nuclear Energy. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Goodbye.
All right, have a great day. Bye. All right. All right, here we go. And we are back with Dr. Andrew Beshears. And I'll give you a little bio early. So you are a nuclear chemist, and you focus on nuclear security, safeguards, and non-proliferation. We'll unpack all those words in a few seconds when we start talking about what you actually do. You're actively working on microreactors. That's one of the many things I understand that you're doing. You work with colleagues on 3D printing of nuclear reactor components. Come on, man. And you're working on non-proliferation efforts. And it's really hard to say that word, but I think I did it successfully. So welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
No, thanks for having me, Justin.
All right, so what is your background and how did you come to work at Argonne?
Yeah, so really my story, going back to the thought of engaging and educating the public, my story actually starts back when I was a little kid in grade school. And what got me interested in science first and foremost, which, you know, is the first step in getting to a national lab, really. You know, as a engineer or as a scientist, really started in engagement with one person in particular. You know, this person had become a family friend, and he was a scientist himself. His name's Larry Gazaza. He's actually at Pacific Northwest National Labs. He had just come to Pacific Northwest National Labs, and you know, and I get to talking to him and understanding sort of where he was coming from and his background. He used to work on nuclear submarines. And one thing in particular in his engagement with me is that he would bring me math problems whenever he came to visit our family. And he would come and he would give me a couple of sets of problems, like, okay, how long does it take for you to swim a mile? If this is the rate at which you swim, you know, what happens if you stop a car and you've got a whole bunch of balloons behind you, you know, some really, really basic concepts that I was learning in grade school. And it was great to be able to have somebody to engage me like that, and to, you know, for me to bounce ideas off of and talk to about these concepts. And, you know, fast forward a couple of years into high school, which looking back on it was actually a little too late, if you ask me, when you're talking about the general community. But in high school, I realized I have this penchant really for chemistry and applying my mathematics and physics understanding and paradigms to chemistry. And really, it kind of took off from there. I decided on a whim, you know what, I'm going to do chemistry in college because it's a STEM degree, and I've been told, oh, I can do anything with a STEM degree. And so I went through college, got a bachelor's in science and chemistry. And after that, I decided that I wanted to do a PhD, and went on to the University of Missouri. And it was at the University of Missouri that a couple of colleagues actually went to my professor at we call it Mizzou, at University of Missouri Columbia, and went to Mizzou and said, hey, we're looking for graduate students that can do work. And my advisor approached me and said, hey, this is a great opportunity. It gets your foot into a national, you know, another national lab at Argonne. I want you to consider going. So I thought about it and decided I want to go. And after one summer of work, actually the people that I was working with said, you know what, we want to make you a lab graduate fellow. I got converted, and I've been here ever since. So since 2015, finished up my PhD, and been at Argonne ever since. And I love the group. I love the people I work with.
That's an amazing story. That's an amazing story. So people that work in nuclear science often talk about harnessing the power of the atom, right? So we also know that there are other forms of energy. With that as the context, what do we mean by power, and what is nuclear energy?
Yeah, so power and nuclear energy, really what it is that we are harnessing the atom. I know that's, you know, a coined phrase from the 50s and 60s and a lot of PSAs, you know, harnessing the atom. The atom is our friend. But in this case, what we're doing is that we're causing the heavy atom of uranium to break apart within a reactor by basically hitting it with a subatomic particle called a neutron. That neutron causes it to become unstable, and it breaks apart. And actually, when it breaks apart, something really spectacular happens, and that is that it loses mass. So if you think about it, it's like taking a piece of bread, and when you split that piece of bread apart, you no longer have two halves of bread. You actually have almost like 2 loaves of bread, or you have some bread left, and some of it disappeared. And what happens to that stuff that disappears? Well, that is mass becoming energy. So a lot of people like to point at Einstein's equation of E equals mc squared. Really what that means is that its energy is equal to mass times the constant of light squared. And really, that's all we're doing, is that we're taking that mass by forcing that uranium to split apart. We turn it into that missing stuff, matter, into energy. And by turning it into energy, it becomes heat. That heat then creates steam. That steam then goes through a turbine. So it's a lot like other ways that we produce energy using heat. And by turning that turbine, we get electricity. And that's what allows us to turn on the lights and to run our hair dryers and our washing machines and everything else. And that's basically what nuclear energy is harnessing the atom to produce that heat that allows us to turn on the lights.
I do know a lot about using hair dryers, as you can tell. I'll move on to that question. Okay, so over 75 years ago, and again, you know, it shouldn't be lost on anyone that's watching this, on July 1st is Argonne's 75th anniversary. So over 75 years ago, Enrico Fermi and his team figured out how to create the first self-sustaining nuclear reaction. That was nuclear energy in its early days. Explain how he did this, and I think you did already, pretty much. But the system's systems might have been a little bit different earlier. Explain how you did this and how that differs from advanced nuclear reactors today.
Yeah. So, as you were saying, Enrico Fermi did this actually in Chicago, underneath Stagg Field in a squash court, and really it was using bricks of pure graphite and some uranium, and by slowing down the neutrons with that graphite, he was able to continue those neutrons hitting new uranium atoms. Those uranium atoms split apart, and the part of when it splits apart is that more neutrons that are needed to cause the fissions or to cause the breaking apart of the uranium atom, those then go through the rest of the reactor. And based on a probability, there's a chance that that neutron will hit another uranium atom and will cause another fission. And so that's what we're talking about, this chain reaction, is that we're causing that fission creates more, and then by the time that you're up to what we'd like to call full power, you've got this sustained reaction going on of neutrons being produced and being used, and we're creating all this heat and all this energy. So that's what Enrico Fermi did with Chicago Pile 1 at the University of Chicago. How that's different from now is that in the last 75 plus years, we've seen that we've gone from using graphite to water. Water, in this case, both slows down those neutrons because of the interaction of the neutron and the hydrogen atoms in water, because water is just H2O. And by slowing down those neutrons, we then can create more fissions, just like you would use the graphite for. And in this case, it actually lends itself to making power, which was realized back during the heyday of what we like to call nuclear power. And that's what produced the boiling water reactor and the pressurized water reactor, is that water not only slows down the neutrons, but it now heats up and creates steam. And so that steam then is what's used to power a turbine. And so that's what created the first nuclear power reactors. So that has actually gone another step in what we like to call advanced reactors. And rather than using water, which is a scarce resource and is limited, there's only so many places that you can have fresh, usable water and use that as a part of your cooling system, as well as other chemistry and things that need to be done to make sure that nothing is happening within the reactor itself, whether it be corrosion or chemistry imbalances that would affect how the reactor is operated. Really, we've gone beyond water at this point because water is such a scarce resource. And now we're looking at using things such as liquid metals. So we're using metals that if anybody has gone to grab their grandmother's iron pot or anything like that on the stove, they'll realize, oh, that's really hot. And that's because metal conducts heat really, really well, better than water. And so consequently, if we can then use those liquid metals in order to circulate the heat, to take the heat as a coolant, and then circulate that heat to eventually like an open air cycle, which we call a Brayton cycle or a closed Brayton cycle, then we are able to turn a turbine again, but without the use of water. And then it's not just limited to metals. We can also use salts. And this is something that when I talk to kids when I talk to students at high schools, you can almost see like this flash of inspiration when you're talking about salt. I hold up a vial of table salt, sodium chloride, and I say,
that would have been my question. Are you talking about like just regular table, this thing I'm putting on my steak, right? Is that what you're talking about?
It's a little bit different. To actually make it run, we have to use fluoride instead of chloride, and there's a couple of different recipes that use lithium, sodium, potassium fluorides, or you can just use lithium and beryllium. And so it's not quite what you put on your steak, but it's very, very close. Okay. They're both salts, and once you get to a certain temperature, it does become liquid. And when it becomes liquid, that's why we call it molten. it actually can then be used to circulate the heat through the system. And again, just like you would for a liquid metal reactor, you can then power a closed or open air Brayton cycle and produce electricity that way. And that's just 2 examples of 6 different advanced reactor concepts that are being proposed right now and are being researched. And one of my favorites, of course, getting into the next next set of questions that you have for me is microreactors, and being able to go from a large conventional reactor down to a small reactor, and sort of how do we actually make that work where we're reducing the footprint of nuclear energy.
While we're on that topic, why don't you jump into microreactors and like what they are and what benefit they bring to communities that hopefully they'll be introduced into? Yeah,
so microreactors are, like I was alluding to, much smaller, and that's where the micro comes from. It's over 100 times smaller in most cases than conventional reactors. Conventional reactors, we're talking about gigawatts of electricity being produced in gigawatt thermal, so thermal energy that's being produced. But within a microreactor, we're talking about a cap of about 30 megawatt electrical. So basically, we're shrinking that reactor to a really small footprint. And how that works is that unlike reactors that we use for energy nowadays that use water, we're able to use other coolant systems because it is so small. So we're able to use something called a heat pipe. And basically within that heat pipe, what we're doing is that we are heating up metal to become vapor. And that vapor then travels from the hot end to the cold end. And at the cold end, we then take that heat off and then use that to produce electricity. So much different from water and producing steam. And this actually greatly shrinks the size of the coolant system within a reactor. So we go from having this really large turbine and this really large primary coolant loop, which is where all the water is housed that goes past the nuclear fuel elements and where that fissioning, that breaking apart of the uranium is happening. And we then turn it into basically just a rod. Another thing that is happening is that we're actually using gas as well. So a couple of microreactors, rather than using heat pipes or water, are using gas, and they're circulating gas through the the part of the reactor that's causing the nuclear fission, and taking that heat and then using that to drive a turbine. And if you think about how we're getting into the summer here in the United States, and just how hot air rises and cold air sinks, basically what we're doing is that we're using that to our advantage, and we are causing hot air to rise and go through and with enough force and power to turn a turbine. And then as it cools down and it's releasing its energy by pushing that turbine, and then going through an additional heat sink if it's necessary, then going back through the reactor after it's cooled down and being able to basically take the heat again.
Wow. Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing. Thank you for that. I'm imagining that Argonne doesn't do all this groundbreaking work by itself. I mean, we could say that that'd be untrue. So we need partnerships. So how is collaboration an important component of your work?
Yeah, collaboration is absolutely necessary nowadays. It's no longer just one person sitting at a bench trying to make everything work. It really takes a team to make things happen. And even when you go back and you look at CP1, it took a team of scientists and engineers in order to assist Enrico Fermi. And even though Enrico Fermi is really the name that rises to the top, there was a bunch of other scientists and graduate students, and even those that up until recently, were here in Chicago still and would talk about being grad students at the University of Chicago when CP1 was occurring. We've gotten away from really this thought of the team, the collaboration that's happening, and it really does take that team. And even at a national lab, it takes a lot of people to make things happen. We need specialists that can tell us about electrical and heat hazards to keep us safe. You know, you need the scientists in order to do the experiments, but we also need you know, people to help keep us safe. I joke that our administrative assistant is the one that keeps me on the straight and narrow when it comes to, you know, getting my time card in on time, and taking care of travel, and making sure that I'm not booking the wrong flights, or that you know, I'm very much sometimes the absent-minded scientist, especially when I get caught in those thought patterns. And so really it takes everybody at a national lab in order to make the dream a reality. And even
I think
farther
that's an
than that.
important point.
Yeah,
Go
yeah,
ahead.
no.
I think that's an important point, because as you're talking about administrative secretary, we also have people that build the facilities, right, that you use to do the research, right? And there was a guy that we're going to be featuring, actually, you know, just another plug for our 75th anniversary, Rudy Bowie, who in the 80s did a lot of networking, but also built up the Argonne campus to what it is now, to be able to conduct that groundbreaking science. Like, so to your point, scientists and people that work facilities, engineers, to think up things to be able to put in. We have glass blowers who I'm pretty sure are the reason that we're able to create different types of science, right? So it really is a global community. And it doesn't just stop at Argonne, to your point. That is writ large to the entire scientific community, because Argonne has a lot of partners out there. I'm not going to be able to list them all out, but they go from the local ecosystem, right? But you're talking about, if you're talking about PNNL, you know, Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, Brookhaven National Laboratory, and above. So totally agree with you on that point.
Yeah, so that's a great point. You know, I've been talking specifically about the lab itself, but there's so much more too. You know, we work a lot with local universities. We work with University of Chicago. We work with Northwestern. We work with Aurora University. We work with Lewis University. You know, all the way down to where Dr. Huff is a professor at University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. University of Missouri. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that collaboration. And that's just universities. We work with other national labs, Pacific Northwest National Labs, Brookhaven, Idaho National Lab, Los Alamos. You know, we are a very strong interwoven community in getting science done and furthering these ideas. As Katie was talking about, you know, really we are a part of that system that takes those ideas at a university and gets them scaled up and gets them to a point that gets to another collaborator, which is industry. If we weren't there to help scale up the science and to look at how do you move this from a benchtop idea into a small pilot plant or anything like that, then really industry doesn't have anything to work with. And by doing this science at a national lab, in most cases, we can go out to industry and say, these are these wonderful ideas. These are these great, technologies that we have that we can share with you, and we can then help your business. And ultimately, industry takes that baton, right? Because this is ultimately a race of technology. Takes that baton from a national labs and then gets it to the finish line, where it becomes a product or a resource or a benefit to society and to consumers. That's perfect.
That's perfect. Last question for you. What's the coolest thing about being a nuclear chemist?
Oh, there's so many different things. Yeah. No. So one of my favorite things, I'm a learner at heart. Whether I'm you know, playing board games with my kids, or I'm reading a book or anything like that, I always go into the mindset of I can learn more. I can use this to my benefit and to the benefit of those around me. And one great thing about being in my field and working with people that I work with is the fact that I learn every day. And I'm not sure how many people, you know, can really say that. you know, I come away every day with a new bit of information or a new strategy or a new way of thinking about things, whether it's science or the community at large. You know, like I said, talking with my female coworkers, you know, understanding where they're coming from, and it gives me insight and inspiration as well to continue to do what I do. You know, and in fact, talking with K through 12 students and university students, seeing from their eyes and seeing their enthusiasm really also helps me. So I learn something every day. Great, another thing, especially at working at Argonne and having 75 years to build up our capabilities, is I have a lot of really cool people that I get to go to with those ideas and collaborate. And I get to use things like the Advanced Photon Source. I can go to Atlas and talk to the people who are making medical isotopes, and you know, discuss some of my ideas and my, you know, get to learn from them as well. And then also, even further, you know, than just being able to use the facilities. Again, I work with a great team. You know, being able to work with you, Justin, and your group. Being able to work with my counterparts and other divisions and directorates, which is kind of how Argonne is organized. It's kind of like a huge tree of knowledge, basically, is the best way to put it. And you know, really, it's great to be able to be a part of that. And that's one of the greatest things about being at Argonne and being a nuclear chemist, is just letting my curiosity and letting my learning just go wherever it takes me.
That's perfect. That's perfect. I'm gonna steal that tree of knowledge line from you. That is perfect. But I know you have to go. I know I have to go. Thank you so much. We've been talking with Dr. Andrew Beshears. He is a nuclear chemist at Argonne National Laboratory. It has been a pleasure speaking with you.
It's been a pleasure, Justin. Thank you.
Take care.
You too.
All right, let's see if we can... I always get this wrong. I think, yeah, okay, you have to jump off. Did that work? It did work. So thank you again for joining us. That was a fascinating couple of conversations, right? So we started off talking with Dr. Catherine Huff, who was acting assistant secretary and principal deputy assistant secretary for the Office of Nuclear Energy. She's talking about her new role and her STEM path that led her to this role, and the old and new things that she's really getting jazzed up about the nuclear industry that she's going to be tackling for the Department of Energy. And then we just ended up our conversation with Dr. Andrew Beshears, and he's talking about, again, his STEM path, but also like the really cool things he's doing in nuclear energy. Like real, I mean, the history he goes into is just fascinating. But he's talking about micro reactors, these smaller reactors that you're able to put in communities. They can help power these communities. Advanced reactors, all these types of things. Wonderful conversation. And I would be remiss if I didn't also remind you that on July 1st is going to be Argonne's 75th anniversary. And we talked about it a couple of times over the course of these interviews. But very important date, very seminal date insofar as how far we've come and how far we have yet to go. So without further ado, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a wonderful conversation. Look forward to more in the future. And you take care. Thank you so much for joining us. Bye.